Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Liberty Watch. I'm your host, Liberty Man Van, and today is Monday, January the 15th, 2018, a brand new year. And today we're going to talk predominantly about the Republican tax reform plan that was just passed. And after we talk about that, we'll end the show by talking about a funny, but really kind of sad story too. You'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. But first up, the Republican tax reform bill, which was passed by a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and signed into law by President Donald J. Trump. Yes, that's Donald J. Trump of Make America Great Again fame. But don't let this hat confuse you. I'm not a cheerleader of Trump. As I've told you before on this show, I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for Hillary. I'm not voting for any other more candidates if they don't really believe in freedom as a primary political value. Just not going to vote for them. So, what about this Republican Tax Reform Act? Was it good? Was it bad? Well, anytime you're talking about tax cuts, that part of it, I say, way to go. Because that means you get to keep more of the money that you earned. That's always a good thing. So hooray for that part of it. Because, you know, the less money government has, the better. The less taxation, the better. You know how I feel about taxation. It violates the non-aggression principle, which is a libertarian idea. The non-aggression principle means you can't hit people and you can't take their stuff. Well, what does coercive taxation do? It takes your stuff really without your consent, so it's theft. The government is just the mafia posing as a human rights organization. So any time I see a tax cut, I say, hey, that part of it is great. However, this bill did nothing to address profligate spending by the federal government, and it's going to explode the federal debt in the years to come. Did I mention the federal debt? In addition to lowering the income tax rates for all the brackets, no matter what bracket you're in, individual income tax, federal income tax will fall. And it also contained a huge cut in the rate for corporate taxes from 35, all the corporate income tax from 35 down to 21%. Now, the proponents of this bill say that because we're lowering corporate tax rates, it's going to stimulate the economy because corporations will have more money to spend on things like capital improvements, or if they want to give some of that to their employees, they'll go out and spend money. So that is true. It will stimulate the economy some. However, it will not be enough to offset the loss of revenue that the government will suffer from this bill. Now, I'm all for the government suffering a loss of revenue. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a great thing as far as I'm concerned. However, like I said before, they didn't couple this with any spending cuts, so it will, despite the stimulatory effect of lowering the corporate rates, it's still going to be a budget buster in the years to come. And another thing they did to make it look better was to say that it has a sunset provision that in 2027 these tax cuts will expire. So then when they were looking at the long-term effect of this, that made it look better on paper, but that's just budgetary sleight of hand by the Republicans. because what they'll do is when it gets to that date in time for them to expire, they'll just extend them. So this is really a budget busting tax bill here, Tax Reform Act. Now, another provision in this bill was that it eliminates the individual mandate, the Obamacare mandate that you buy health insurance. And from a liberty perspective, that's great. People should have, they shouldn't be forced to buy something. People shouldn't be forced to buy health insurance. They should be given that choice. Now, Democrat Larry Summers went on television to explain how repealing this individual mandate is going to cause 10,000 people to die. Here he is.
Pretty clear evidence looking across different states and looking when health insurance has been phased in and out. When people lose health insurance, they're less likely to get preventive care. They're more likely to defer health care they need, and ultimately they're more likely to die. And it's very hard to quantify precisely. My piece explains why an estimate that thousands will die as a consequence of this bill is actually a very conservative estimate.
Now, to statists like Larry Summers, we are all just little babies that have to be coddled and told what to do. And he also said this following in a CNBC.com article. He said, you have to look at the data, what the patterns are across all the country, he said. I don't see how you can believe that if 10 million or 13 million, whatever exactly the number is, of people are going to lose health insurance, that's not going to have health consequences. Notice the wording here. He says people are going to lose health insurance. Really? Nobody has to drop their health insurance if they don't want to. If the people that are being forced by Obamacare to buy health insurance still want to buy health insurance, nothing's stopping them from doing this. They just aren't being compelled anymore. Also, a National Institute of Health study, which was done in 2009, pre-Obamacare, says the following. It is not possible to draw firm causal inferences from the results of observational analyses, but there is little evidence to suggest that extending insurance coverage to all adults would have a large effect on the number of deaths in the United States, the study said. Now, anytime you have a tax cut proposal, the big spenders, the socialists in Congress are surely to be opposed to it. So enter the Grinch. Remember what the Grinch does? The Grinch pretends to be Santa Claus. Pretends to be giving you something. But he really doesn't have anything to give you. He just wants to steal from one group and give to another. Or, since Grinch doesn't produce any money, he has to borrow the money. So when the government engages in these big spending programs, they have to borrow a lot of the money. So borrowing, you see, borrowing a lot of money is just a tax on future generations. It's the children and grandchildren that will have to pay for it. So remember, the Grinch pretends to be Santa Claus, but then he goes and steals the presents from the children. So here is the Grinch in this next clip attacking this bill.
This proposal would cause devastating economic pain for tens of millions of Americans by, on one hand, giving incredibly large tax breaks for the wealthiest people in the country, while at the same time making it harder for our children to get a decent education, harder for the families of this country to get the health care they need.
So whenever you have tax cuts, you're going to have socialists like Bernie Sanders come out of the woodwork to attack it. And one way they're going to try to attack it is by saying, oh, it's just a tax cut for the rich. It's just going to help the rich. As it turns out, that's a big lie, okay? All tax brackets are going to receive a tax cut in this bill. Furthermore, you need to consider who pays the lion's share of the taxes. Let's say you have a 3% across the board tax cut. Let's just look at the math. Let's say you have one person that makes $5 million a year, another taxpayer that makes $20,000 a year. Well, if you give a 3% cut, 3% of $5 million is going to be more than 3% of $20,000. But let's look at who pays most of the taxes according to taxfoundation.org data. The share of income earned by the top 1% of taxpayers rose to over 20% in 2014. Their share of federal individual income taxes also rose to almost 40%. In 2014, the top 50% of all taxpayers paid over 97% of all individual income taxes, while the bottom 50% paid the remaining 2.7%. The top 1% paid a greater share of individual income taxes, that's 40%, than the bottom 90% combined. The bottom 90% paying only a little less than 30%. The top 1% of taxpayers paid a over 27% individual income tax rate, which is more than 7 times higher than taxpayers in the bottom 50%. So naturally, if you pay more of the taxes anyway, you're going to get a little more in terms of dollar amount benefit from a tax cut bill. And how about the people who didn't like this bill claiming that it wouldn't help the poor? Baloney. According to a fee.org article, the following. Despite all their talk about death and destruction, Democrats have overlooked the ways this tax bill could help the lower class. They painted this cut as a handout to the top 1%, but the Tax Foundation found that all income groups will see an increase in their after-tax incomes in 2018. Per their analysis, this reform will create 925,000 new jobs, boost economic growth, and lift wages by almost 3%. That sounds like it would help the working class, not threaten their livelihood. Now, will giving corporations a tax break, you don't think that's going to help some workers? I mean, who works for these corporations? People, right? And these people are going to go out and spend money if they have more money to spend. It's also going to make wages go up. It's going to create some economic growth. Is that not going to help the poor? Well, sure, it's going to help the poor. As a matter of fact, on the heels of this announcement, there were some companies that made some bright announcements. And let's look at a few of them. AT&T will see a tax reduction from almost 33% rate down to 21%. This prompted them to announce that all 200,000 employees will receive a $1,000 bonus. Sounds like that might help the poor. Third Fifth Bancorp announced that 13,500 employees will be receiving a bonus, and minimum wage will be raised company-wide to $15 per hour. So a company raising its minimum wage, will that not help the poor? Wells Fargo also announced that they will be raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour, and that they will donate $400 million to charities and nonprofits in the coming year. $400 million to charities? Will that not help the poor? Comcast announced it will be giving $1,000 bonuses to more than 100,000 employees and will be investing over $50 billion in broadband and network infrastructure. So let's celebrate these tax cuts. They allow people who earn a living to keep more of what they earn. That increases your liberty. And finally today we're going to end with a story which when I first saw it I thought it was rather funny, but the more I thought about it, the more sad it became. The title of this article says it all. That's right. Pennsylvania inmate loses appeal after trying to argue drugs in his buttocks were not his. A Pennsylvania inmate who tried to convince the court that the drugs in his rear end did not belong to him lost his appeal last week. The Pennsylvania judicial panel remained unfazed when they ruled that the bag of drugs in Edwin Wiley Biggs' buttocks were his, upholding a court ruling that sentenced him to 3 to 6 additional years behind bars for the incident, the New York Daily News reported. When the inmate bent over to be searched for contraband, the corrections officer found a clear plastic bag containing a small blue balloon could be seen sticking out of his rectum, according to the court document. The sad part of this story is that what this man did was illegal. If a guy wants to stick some weed up his ass, whose ass is it? If he wants to inhale some weed into his lungs, whose lungs are they? Prohibitions against what you can and cannot put into your body start with the premise that you don't own your own body. And I reject that premise. So should you. Thanks for joining us today. That's it. That's the end of our show. If you enjoyed it, be sure to tell someone. You can go subscribe to the channel on YouTube. You can also look at my blog, libertymanvan.com. Glad you could join us, and be sure to be with us next time on Liberty Watch, where we don't believe you need some guy with a bullhorn to tell you what to do. See you next time.